Today is the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, one of the most important days in Canadian history and one of the most important days in world history. On this day, 80 years ago, over 14,000 Canadian soldiers were given their task, given their own landing ground on the beaches of Normandy, and successfully carried out the invasion of Juno Beach with steel resolve and true Canadian grit. It cost us heavily, but our troops did the job, and they did it well. D-Day was and still remains the largest and most ambitious military operation in history. And today, for likely the very last time, our soldiers who stormed Juno Beach 80 years ago are back on that beach today, standing shoulder to shoulder to mark this important day in history. You all know the history of D-Day and the pivotal role that Canadian soldiers played in the Second World War. But over the past 2 years, True North has had the honor of speaking with two men who were there that day, who saw it happen through their own eyes, who answered the call when our country needed them the most. And today on Ratioed, we're going to let them speak about what D-Day was like through their own eyes. Jim Parks, who was part of the first wave of Canadian soldiers to land on Juno Beach, and Honorary Lieutenant General Richard Romer, a reconnaissance fighter pilot who flew several missions on D-Day over the skies of Normandy. Now, before we get into the show, the common question is not much of a question, but it's more of a request. If you have a family member who fought for Canada in the Second World War, tell their story below in the comments. Tell us their names so we can remember them and honor their sacrifice. Here are some of the beautiful scenes on Juno Beach earlier today, where for likely the very last time, our Canadian troops who stormed that beach 80 years ago are back on the beach, marking this important day, standing shoulder to shoulder, and remembering those that never were able to come home. Our Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of France, and other foreign dignitaries were there on the beach today, but I want to highlight the comments of Canada's future king, the Prince of Wales, Prince William, who had this to say to our troops who made it back to the beach today.
I want to thank you, our veterans, for your extraordinary acts of bravery and sacrifice on Juno Beach and the liberation of Europe. All of you demonstrated heroism and determination that ensured fascism was conquered. The commitment to service displayed by Canadian troops is a great testament to the strength of the people of Canada. Canada and the UK continue to stand side by side, as we did in 1944, just as strong together 80 years later. Ensuring the memory of those who fought for freedom lives on is why we've come together again today, to say thank you. Thank you for our freedom, and thank you for your service. Merci pour notre liberté, et merci pour votre service.
I want to go into the operational detail of Canada's D-Day mission. Over 14,000 Canadian soldiers were involved in the operation. 121 Royal Canadian Navy vessels were also involved, and 15 Royal Canadian Air Force squadrons were involved in the operation. The training for the operation began in June of 1943, basically a full year before Canadian troops touched down on Juno Beach. Juno Beach was divided into two sectors, Mike, which was for the west side, and Nan for the east side. Mike's sector was attacked by the 7th Canadian Infantry Brigade, followed by the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, the Canadian Scottish Regiment, and the 1st Hussars, who were in support. The Nan sector was attacked by the Regina Rifle Regiment of the 7th Brigade, the North Shore Regiment, the Queen's Own Rifles, and the Fort Garry Horse Tank Regiment. The Royal Winnipeg Rifles and the Queen's Own Rifles, who were part of the first wave of landings, took heavy casualties on the day. Over 350 Canadians laid down their lives on Juno Beach, with a further 1,000 casualties on the day. And although the Canadians landed last on this day, the Canadians finished the day ahead of the British and American divisions. And for those that haven't seen it, I want to take this opportunity to read the letter that was delivered to all Canadian troops on the eve of D-Day by Lieutenant General Harry Crerar, who was in command of the 1st Canadian Army. I want all ranks of the Canadian Army to know what is in my mind as the hour approaches when we go forward into battle. I have complete confidence in our ability to meet the tests which lie ahead. We are excellently trained and equipped. The quality of both senior and junior leadership is of the highest. As Canadians, we inherit military characteristics which were feared by the enemy in the last Great War. They will be still more feared before this war terminates. The plans, the preparations, the methods, and the technique which will be employed are based on knowledge and experience bought and paid for by 2 Canadian Division at Dieppe. The contributions of that hazardous operation cannot be overestimated. It will prove to have been the essential prelude to our forthcoming and final success. We enter into this decisive phase of the war with full faith in our cause, with calm confidence in our abilities, and with grim determination to finish quickly and unmistakably this job we came overseas to do. As in 1918, the Canadians in Italy and in Northwest Europe will hit the enemy again and again until at some not distant time, the converging Allied armies link together and we will be rejoined in victory with our comrades of 1 Canadian Corps. It was that letter which would have been read by Jim Parks of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles before he landed at Juno Beach on D-Day. This is what he experienced on that day.
We were put on boats at Portsmouth, which is the southern part of England. That's where and I was in a landing craft tank, which is a bigger one, because I was with the mortar platoon, and we had 2 mortar carriers, and we were lined up behind 2 armored bulldozers on the landing craft tank, and we were supposed to go into the beach 2 minutes ahead of the infantry assault boats, because the armored bulldozers had big ropes on them with hooks, and when they could come off the landing craft, they were to pull off all the obstacles in the water, which would allow the landing craft to come in, wouldn't be hitting the obstacles. However, that's the way it was. We're supposed to be 2 minutes ahead of them, but the way things worked out, we all got mixed up, and we were mixed up with the landing craft coming in, and the bulldozers. They were a little late pulling those obstacles over the water. But when they went off the landing craft, the landing craft got fouled up, and our carriers, when we went off the landing craft, the water was too deep, and we sank. The water was about 8 feet deep, and it was about 6 to 8 feet when you figure out the waves. And when you get close to the shore, it's rougher. And so we end up, instead of coming on the shore with 2 mortar carriers, we end up swimming in instead. The mortar carriers were under the water. So I ended up on the beach, and the first thing I got to the beach, I plopped beside this. I knew this Corporal Scape. He'd been mortally wounded, so I picked up the Sten gun from him because I lost all my equipment going in, and then I headed for the sand dunes and waited for the rest of our crew to come in. It took a little while because there's a lot of noise and a lot of firing going on, and although the machine gun fire being put down, there's a lot of mortar bombs still landing from the enemy had mortars further inland, and they were popping the bombs onto the beach. So we had to take cover quite a bit. Otherwise, we were kind of lucky too, because the sand would absorb quite a bit of the shock of the bombs landing and take up a bit of the shrapnel. But it was still pretty dangerous.
The debt that we owe Major Jim Parks and his fellow troops of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles who stormed Juno Beach is simply incalculable. But we have a duty to never forget his name and never forget his sacrifice. I now want to highlight what D-Day was like from the skies, through the eyes of Honorary Lieutenant General Richard Romer, who I had the honor to speak with last Remembrance Day, and who told us what it was like to play a role on this truly historic day.
Well, D-Day, we finally knew where the landing was going to be. And 2 of us went out from England and across. It was a very exciting moment because this is what we had been training for. There was no fear. It was all pumped up. And my trip across was very simple. I was number 2, flying on was a fellow called Jack Taylor. And we got over to the over to the beach sector, and there was a wall of cloud right sitting over the beach, so that we had to go under the wall and down to about 500 feet to get through this, which is what we did. People were firing at us in the usual way. Then we went down to Caen, which is the big town, to do a reconnaissance, came back up the Orne River, and there was a big bridge there that the British had landed gliders filled with troops in. They were fighting that battle at the moment. Then up and down the beach, back and forth, on a reconnaissance basis, also looking for any fighters that might be coming to attempt to shoot up people on the beach. And there weren't any, because we had, between the British and the Canadians and the Americans, the fighters had fundamentally, from the German point of view, disappeared. And then at that point, I going up and down the beach, two of us, and I looked at my fuel gauge, and it said 0. So, because I had been flying on this other man, not really paying attention to my petrol. And so I said to my number one, time to get home. So we left and went up to England, and I landed at Thorney Island. Petrol ran out when I touched down, just barely mid. But the concentration on what was happening there outside the airplane was total, which is the reason I almost lost myself in terms of running out of fuel. But I made it all right.
Yeah. And you went back later on the day.
But the same day. Oh, well.
Wow, yeah.
I got fuel, no problem, in the P-51, and back to base, got rebriefed again for a new mission, which I was leading this time. So it was a full day, and I did, I think, 2 more. 1 more there, and then 2 more the next day. It was keep going.
And you can remember what it was like that day? And
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. It was a great exercise in euphoria, because we were doing what we've been trained to do, and we were doing it well. And yeah, it was scary from time to time, but the reality was we were making progress on the ground, which was our job to help them, and we did.
And from the sky on that day, could you feel like the invasion was working? Could you see it making its progress? And could you feel like you guys were winning the day?
When we got back to base, we were briefed as to how the armies, British, Canadian, American, were doing on the ground. That's when we could tell we were making some real progress. And they added that into what we could see when we were flying our reconnaissance. So we could tell that we were making good progress indeed. I'm in a little airplane, and I'm totally concentrating with one or 2 or 3 or whatever people, and that's my world. And if it's going bad for me, I can tell, or if it's going good, I can tell. And getting back and forth 135 times is quite something.
Oh, certainly.
And I never thought about it very much. The reality was, from time to time, I got scared big time. But the reality was I would stick my head below the level of the cockpit and keep going. Hard to put it all into words.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Was there a sense amongst your squadron and amongst people involved in the war that they were involved in something very special? Did you guys feel like you were in history
Oh yeah, no question about that.
It will not be long until the heroes like Jim Parks and Richard Romer will no longer be with us. We live in a country that shares very little similarity to the one that they fought for and in many cases died for 80 years ago. We live in a country with leaders who seem ashamed of our past, with leaders who seem more interested in erasing and rewriting our history than celebrating it and honoring it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Our leaders today seem more concerned about achieving diversity quotas and by lowering the uniform and dress regulations for our Canadian soldiers than by building up a strong and competent fighting force. We live in a society today that shuns masculinity and suppresses patriotism and nationalism. Our Prime Minister believes Canada has no core values and that we are a post-national state. We must never forget the names of those who fought and died for this country, who paid the ultimate price. We owe them at the very least a debt of gratitude. But I would argue that we all as Canadians today have to do our part to fight for and to preserve the country that our great Canadian soldiers laid down their lives for. We must not let our country crumble and fragment into pieces over political and linguistic lines. We must remain a proud and unified people, willing to stand up and to oppose those that seek to irreparably damage our country. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with two short clips from the two men you heard earlier in the episode. Jim Parks gives some advice to young Canadians today.
And so what is the message that you have when you speak to schools, you speak to students, you speak to young Canadians? What is it that you think is important that they know about what you lived through, what the Second World War was fought for, and what Canada means to you?
Well, what it means is that just cherish what they have, look around what they've got. They're able to walk, they're able to get a job where they want, they're able to travel where they want, they can do what they want each day, get up, they take what job they want, but they have the freedom of choice. It's a matter of preparing themselves for that choice. And they take advantage of that. Don't take it for granted. Just realize what you have and utilize every aspect you can of your energy and your education to do the best you can to make a living. Because what you got your whole life ahead of you, you got to prepare for it. You got to make sure you get a good foundation, and you got to look ahead. Prepare yourself for not only the next year, but look ahead a bit and say, well, how am I preparing today so I'm better off next year and the year after? Like if you're looking forward to when you first get started, you get married, or you want to get a house, how you have to plan ahead of time, how you're going to plan to get that, where you're going to go. And in the meantime, you've got your own job, you're preparing yourself in your own job, and you're improving yourself in your education and work habits so you get ahead in your job and earn more money, because without earning the money, you're not going to go anywhere. You've got to get a good foundation of work habits and education.
And Lieutenant General Richard Romer answers the question, what it means to be a Canadian. We're bringing in a lot of new people into Canada, and a lot of people are coming into this country. And I'd like to know from your perspective, it's a tough question. I can't answer it myself. I wish I could, but I struggle to at least. In your mind, what does it mean to be a Canadian?
It means to be, to me it's very simple. To me it means to be part of a country that is not a threat to anybody, that is a little dragging its feet in terms of protecting itself. When I do a lot of talking and speaking, and I said, this is the finest country in the world in which to live. We're letting too many people in from time to time. But the reality is, we are not a power, but we are a presence, and we're letting people in here by the high numbers of 500,000 a year. I don't know how we're going to do that. But the reality, to be a Canadian is a matter of great pride for me. And it's the safest country that I know to be a citizen and a participating citizen to the best of one's ability. It's the finest country in the world in which to live right now.